It didn't start with a message, or a call, or anything obvious. It started with a pause. A small, almost invisible pause, in the way someone remembered you. And somehow, you felt it. Not clearly, not logically, just, something shifted. Maybe it was that quiet moment late at night when everything slowed down, and your mind wandered back to a memory you thought had already faded. Or that strange feeling when a song played, and for no reason at all, your chest tightened, just slightly. You brushed it off, didn't you? Told yourself it was nothing. But what if it wasn't? What if the reason it felt so subtle is because what they're feeling isn't loud, dramatic, or obvious? It's something deeper, something they haven't even fully understood themselves yet. You see, when people think about someone, we usually imagine intensity, missing, longing, chasing. But this isn't that. This is quieter, more complicated. They've been thinking about you in moments you'd never expect, not when they're alone and emotional, but when they're distracted, busy, living their life. In between conversations, in the middle of a random day, while doing something completely unrelated, you appear, not as a memory they're trying to hold on to, but as a feeling they can't quite place. And that's what confuses them, because it's not the kind of thinking that pushes someone to act immediately. It's the kind that makes them pause and question, why did I just think about them? Why does this still feel unfinished? But here's the part no one really talks about. They're not thinking about you the way you expect, not in the way you've imagined, not in a perfect, romantic, idealized version. They're thinking about the real moments, the small ones, the ones that didn't seem important at the time, the way you reacted to something they said, the way you stayed calm when things felt tense, the way you didn't try to force anything. And now, those moments are replaying differently in their mind, because distance changes perspective. Things that once felt normal start to feel rare. Things they overlooked start to feel meaningful. And suddenly, you're not just someone from the past anymore. You're becoming a question in their present. But here's where it gets even more unexpected. They're not fully comfortable with these thoughts. Not because they're negative, but because they don't fit the version of reality they've been trying to build. They've been moving forward, focusing on other things, convincing themselves that everything is already understood, already settled. And yet, you keep appearing, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make them stop for a second longer than usual. Have you ever noticed how the most important realizations don't arrive all at once? They come in fragments, a thought here, a feeling there, a moment that lingers a little longer than it should. That's exactly where they are right now, not at the conclusion, not even at the full realization, just at the edge of something they haven't named yet. And maybe that's why you've been feeling this subtle pull. Not because something huge has already happened, but because something is quietly forming, without pressure, without urgency, just, naturally. But if you're expecting a clear sign, a sudden action, or a dramatic shift, that's not how this story begins. Because what they're feeling right now is still unfolding. And the truth is, the way they see you is already starting to change, they just haven't admitted it yet. Have you ever had a thought that didn't feel like yours at first, but the more you sat with it, the more it quietly revealed something real? That's where they are now, not chasing answers, not even looking for them, but something keeps returning, gently, persistently, like a soft echo they can't quite ignore. It happens in the smallest ways. A conversation with someone else, and suddenly, they compare it to how you used to listen. A moment of silence, and they realize how rare it felt to be understood without explaining everything. They don't say it out loud. In fact, they probably wouldn't even admit it if someone asked. But internally, something is shifting. You have to understand, this isn't about missing you in a dramatic sense. It's more subtle than that. They're beginning to recognize a difference between what feels temporary and what felt grounded. And for the first time, they're starting to notice that what they've experienced since you doesn't quite match what they had with you. Not better, not worse, just different. And that difference is starting to stay on their mind longer than they expected. At first, they tried to ignore it, told themselves it was just nostalgia, just a passing thought. But the strange thing about real clarity is, it doesn't demand attention. It earns it, slowly, quietly, until one day, they're not just remembering you. They're re-evaluating you. And this is the part you didn't expect. They're not only thinking about what you meant to them. They're thinking about how they showed up, their reactions, their silence, the moments they could have handled differently. The things they didn't fully understand at the time. And now? Those same moments are returning, but from a new perspective, one that feels more honest, more aware. It's not regret. Not in a heavy way, more like realization. The kind that doesn't hurt immediately, but lingers. The kind that makes someone pause mid-thought and go, wait, that mattered more than I thought. And here's something even more interesting. They're not rushing to fix anything. They're not suddenly changing everything overnight. Because what's happening inside them isn't reaction, it's recognition. And recognition takes time. If you've been feeling a strange sense of calm mixed with curiosity lately, like something is quietly aligning without your control, you're not imagining that. It's not about waiting for them. It's about understanding that some connections don't fade. They transform. And sometimes, they come back into focus not through effort, but through awareness. And if this kind of reflection speaks to you, even just a little, stay with it. You might start noticing things differently too, because while they're beginning to understand what you truly were in their life, they haven't yet reached the part that changes everything. Not yet. They're still in the middle of connecting the pieces. Still in that space where thoughts are forming, but not fully spoken. And what happens next isn't about what they feel, it's about what they finally realize. And that moment, it doesn't arrive the way you think it will. And then, it doesn't arrive like a breakthrough. No sudden clarity, no dramatic moment where everything clicks at once. It happens quietly, almost unnoticed. One ordinary day, something small triggers it. Not a memory. Not even your name, just a feeling, a subtle recognition that something they've been searching for has already existed once before. And that's when it shifts, not in intensity, but in understanding. Because up until now, they've been thinking about you, replaying moments, revisiting conversations, questioning their own past reactions. But this is different. Now they're beginning to understand you, not the version they held back then, not the assumptions they made, but the way you actually showed up, the patience you carried, even when things were unclear, the way you didn't try to control outcomes, the way you remained steady. And suddenly, those qualities don't feel ordinary anymore. They feel rare. And here's the part that changes everything. They realize, you weren't just someone who passed through their life. You were someone who offered a kind of presence they didn't fully recognize at the time. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't have the awareness yet. And awareness, once it arrives, it doesn't leave. It reshapes everything. The way they look at connections now, the way they interpret silence, the way they understand what real actually feels like. And without even trying, you've become part of that shift. But here's what you need to see clearly. This isn't about them suddenly turning everything around or rushing toward you with answers. That's not how real understanding works. It doesn't push. It settles. It stays. And it slowly changes how someone sees what truly matters. So if you were expecting a loud moment, a clear signal, a dramatic return, that's not what this is. This is something deeper. Something that unfolds in the way they carry your presence now. Not as a question anymore, but as a quiet truth. And maybe the most important part of all is this: while they've been going through this slow realization, you've been changing too, growing, seeing things differently, understanding your own worth in a way that no longer depends on anyone else noticing it. So this story was never just about them thinking about you. It was about how both of you are arriving at a clearer understanding, from different directions, at different times. And when two people reach that kind of clarity, the outcome isn't forced. It's revealed, naturally, without pressure, without confusion. So instead of wondering what they'll do next, pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself, what have you started to understand, that you didn't see before? Because that answer might be the real turning point, not just for them, but for you. There's a moment, not loud, not dramatic, where everything feels still, not empty, just clear. And strangely, this moment isn't about them anymore. It's about you. Because somewhere along this quiet unfolding, something inside you has shifted too. You're no longer trying to decode every sign, no longer replaying every memory, searching for meaning. There's a new kind of awareness, a calm that didn't exist before. And that's when something unexpected happens. You stop asking, what are they thinking about me? And instead, a different question begins to form. Why does it matter less than it used to? Pause here, because this is subtle, but powerful. You didn't force this change. You didn't wake up one day and decide to feel differently. It happened gradually, through time, through reflection, through moments where you chose yourself, even when it wasn't easy. And now? You're not waiting the same way anymore. Not because you don't care, but because you've started to understand something deeper. That your value was never hidden. It was simply unrecognized. And that changes everything. Because when someone begins to see you clearly, at the same time you've learned to see yourself clearly, the dynamic shifts completely. No chasing, no confusion, no silent questioning, just clarity. And here's where it becomes even more interesting. They may still be processing, still connecting pieces, still arriving at their own understanding. But you? You've already crossed a threshold. You've reached a place where your peace isn't dependent on their realization. And that is what makes your presence different now. Stronger, quieter, unshaken. You see, people often believe that the story ends when someone else realizes your worth. But that's not the real ending. The real shift happens when you no longer need that realization to feel complete. So if they come forward with clarity, you'll recognize it. Not with urgency, not with overwhelming emotion, but with calm understanding. Because you're no longer looking for validation, you're recognizing alignment. And if they don't? If things remain exactly as they are, that clarity you've built within yourself still remains, still guides you, still protects your peace. Because the truth is, this was never just about someone thinking about you differently. It was about you stepping into a version of yourself that no longer depends on being understood to feel worthy. So take a breath. Let that settle. Because something important has already happened, not outside of you, but within you. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real meaning behind all of this from the very beginning. There's one last thing, and it doesn't arrive as a conclusion. It arrives as a quiet realization, almost like a whisper you finally hear clearly. Not about them, about the space between you and them. Because if you look closely now, without rushing, without assuming, you'll notice something subtle. The connection never disappeared. It just changed its form. Before, it was filled with questions, with emotions that felt heavy, urgent, unfinished. Now, it feels lighter, not because it means less, but because you understand more. And that understanding does something unexpected. It removes the need to control the outcome. You're no longer trying to figure out what they'll do next, or when something will happen, or how things should unfold. There's a quiet trust now, not in them, in life itself. And that's where everything becomes different. Because when you stop holding tightly to an outcome, you begin to notice what's actually present. The way you feel in your own energy, the clarity in your thoughts, the absence of that constant inner tension that used to sit quietly in the background. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt this, steady? Not overly excited, not deeply uncertain, just balanced. That feeling isn't accidental. It's something you've built. Through everything you've experienced. Through every moment you chose to reflect instead of react, through every time you allowed yourself to grow without needing immediate answers. And here's the part that often goes unnoticed. When you reach this kind of inner stability, the way others perceive you changes, naturally, not because you're trying to show anything, but because your energy is no longer seeking, it's centered. So yes, they've been thinking about you. More than they expected, in ways they didn't anticipate, but now? That's no longer the most important part of the story, because the real shift is that you're no longer defined by whether or not they fully understand you. You've stepped beyond that, into something quieter, stronger, more complete. And here's where everything opens up. From this place, any path forward becomes possible. If they reach a deeper understanding and step toward you, you'll meet that moment with clarity, not confusion. If they continue on their own path, you'll continue on yours, without feeling like something is missing. Because nothing is missing anymore. This wasn't about waiting for someone to think about you the right way. It was about you discovering a way of being, where your worth, your peace, your direction, doesn't depend on being seen, but on truly seeing yourself. And when that happens, life doesn't feel like a question anymore. It feels like an unfolding, one that no longer needs to be rushed. Because you finally trust where you're standing, right here, right now, and just when you think the story has settled, something new begins, quietly, almost invisibly, not outside, within. It's a different kind of awareness now, not about what happened, not even about what might happen, but about what is, right here, in this moment. You start noticing things you didn't pay attention to before. The way your thoughts no longer spiral the same way. The way certain memories don't carry the same emotional weight. The way silence feels peaceful instead of heavy. And it makes you pause. Because this version of you didn't exist before all of this. Think about that for a second. Everything that felt confusing, everything that made you question things, everything that didn't make sense at the time, it shaped this clarity you now carry. Not perfectly, but honestly. And here's the quiet truth most people miss. Closure doesn't always come from someone else. It comes from understanding something so deeply that you no longer need an explanation. So whether they speak or stay silent, whether they move closer or remain where they are, your direction is no longer affected the same way, because you found something more stable than answers. You found alignment. And alignment feels different. It doesn't rush. It doesn't chase. It simply moves with you. You might still think about them sometimes. That's natural. But notice how it feels now. There's no urgency attached. No pressure to figure it out. Just a quiet acknowledgement that was meaningful. And then, you return to yourself. And that's the shift. Not forgetting. Not disconnecting. But no longer losing yourself in the process. Because the truth is, some connections are not meant to stay the same forever. They evolve. They teach. They reflect parts of you that were waiting to be seen. And once you've seen those parts clearly, you don't go back to who you were before. You move forward, differently, with more awareness, more calm, more trust in your own pace. So if you ever wonder again, what are they thinking about me now? You'll notice something surprising. The question won't feel as important, because the real question has already been answered, not in words, not in actions, but in the way you've grown. And growth like this, it doesn't announce itself loudly. It reveals itself in quiet confidence, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you choose peace over uncertainty. So take one more breath. Feel where you are now, not where you were, not where you thought you needed to be, but here, steady, aware, whole. And maybe, that's how you'll recognize it, not as an ending, not even as a beginning, but as a moment where everything finally makes sense, without needing to be explained at all. And then, something almost unnoticeable happens. You stop revisiting the story, not because you forced yourself to move on, but because the need to revisit it simply fades. It's strange at first. You expect to feel something missing, a gap, a question still waiting for an answer. But instead, there's just space, calm, steady space. And in that space, something new begins to form. Not about them, about you, in a way you've never quite experienced before. You start to see your own patterns clearly. The way you once held on a little longer than you should have. The way you tried to understand everything, even when things weren't meant to be fully understood. And instead of judging yourself for it, you feel compassion, because you realize you were simply doing the best you could with the awareness you had at the time. That realization changes everything. It softens the past. It removes the weight from it. And suddenly, what once felt like something you needed to figure out becomes something you've already learned from. And here's where it becomes even more powerful. You're no longer looking at that connection as something incomplete. You're seeing it as something that served a purpose. A real one. A meaningful one. Not perfect. Not permanent. But necessary. Because without it, you wouldn't have reached this level of clarity. This level of emotional awareness, this quiet understanding of what truly aligns with you, and what doesn't. And that understanding, it starts guiding you now, in ways you don't even have to think about. The way you respond to new people, the way you sense energy without overanalyzing it, the way you recognize what feels right, and what feels forced. There's no confusion in it anymore, just recognition. And here's the part that feels almost unexpected. You no longer need to rewrite the past to feel at peace with it. You don't need them to say anything differently. You don't need a different ending. Because the meaning you were searching for has already revealed itself. Through your growth. Through your awareness. Through the way you've come back to yourself. So if they think about you now, and they will, in their own way, it doesn't carry the same weight for you anymore. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it's no longer what defines your direction. Your direction is clear now, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet certainty that doesn't need validation. And that's how you'll know you've reached a point where your peace doesn't fluctuate based on what someone else feels, thinks, or realizes. You're no longer waiting for alignment. You are aligned. So the story doesn't end with them understanding you. It doesn't end with a return, or a resolution, or a final moment. It continues with you stepping forward. Without hesitation, without doubt, without looking back for answers you no longer need. And in that forward movement, there's something even more meaningful than closure. There's freedom. Quiet, steady, undeniable freedom.